Did you move them to the end?
Again, to see all the stuff that we've done.
I'll give you a quick rundown.
Go for that.
I mean, no. I'll give you a quick rundown. We worked on a mobile game. We've worked with touchscreen interactives on like big touch screens. We've worked with, I don't know if you've ever heard of like an EEG headset or anything. EEG, it's basically like this headband you put on. It kind of reads your brain waves and you can program to like do stuff in an app with it. So it's kind of neat. And motion tracking cameras we did a project with as well. So that's a bit more about what we do. I'm gonna pass it on to Alberto to talk about app administration.
Yeah. Okay. So app administration. App administration is when we take an app or an idea that will become an app from beginning to end. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that you got to do that's not necessarily coding. It's not necessarily making assets like drawing. That needs to get done before you can post to the store or even before they'll let you test. The most important part is your app needs to have goals. Now this is, remember how we told you we were going to break it down into development and app administration? Technically this is part of development when you lay out what your app's going to do. But if you don't have a goal throughout this process, it's going to become very easy to get led astray, to start adding in things that it doesn't need to have. And well, from our own personal experience, things get out of hand very easily when you're developing an app. So it's important to have goals. Does everybody know what a SMART goal is?
Does anyone not know?
Yeah, who doesn't know what a SMART goal is? Okay, all right. All right, so SMART is an acronym that you will learn, that I learned here in the Small Business Entrepreneurship course. And you'll see over here, they have the business model canvas up for you. I recommend everybody makes one of these for their business, regardless of whether or not you're gonna make an app. But SMART stands for simple, manageable, reasonable, and timely. Basically, the idea is that an example of a SMART goal would be, I'm going to make one app that provides a platform for members by 2020. The idea that it has a timeline, it has a clear goal, and it's from there you start breaking the task down into smaller and smaller steps. So SMART goals, while good for any business, are particularly good for apps because if you don't have one, again, things are gonna get hairy fast. And yeah, I guess the second point is to have a very specific app in mind, mainly because apps, as opposed to other forms of development where like a website or even a web app, and by app I really do mean a little box on a phone, those apps usually need to have a very specific purpose, especially when you go through the QA process of Apple, if not Google. Google's going to be very simple, but Apple really will put your app through its paces before they let you post. So, that being said, once you have a very specific app in mind, or a very specific purpose at least, like I don't know, I have, let's say, I'm running a fashion store, I've got a brick and mortar store out on Queen, and I now want to create members for my store, so I'm going to build out an app so that these members can track their points, right? So now that I've decided to build out this app, I have to start doing, budgeting. I have to start finding out what I can do myself and what I can't do, especially if you're an entrepreneur. If you're not an entrepreneur, great. You've got loads of money. Let's just toss it at the problem, and we'll tell the developers to get at it. And whatever they give back, I'll just tell them it's wrong, and we'll go from there. But that's I assume not your process. So that's where your time and everybody's time is going to cost money, and that's where you're going to really have to think about what you're willing to spend on, and what maybe it's just worth it for you to learn to do it yourself. We learned to do almost all of the parts of our app ourselves except for the drawing, which is where Bruno came in. That was the point at which we decided if we want it to look good, let's just pay somebody, even though it's going to cost us money and time. Everything at the end of the day costs time, which leads us to outsourcing. So again, from this idea that you can't do it yourself, You're gonna pay somebody. Presumably, you're gonna pay us. No. Let's say you did find a developer, and this developer will have a suite of abilities. For example, ours would be, a cradle to grave support of the app, and our ability to build on multi-platform. Due to the fact that we use Unity. That's a lot of technical stuff. But hopefully you found someone who can help you to determine what the right developer is for you, and you're gonna choose, maybe you've decided to go abroad for app development. That's okay, people do it. That's the great part about building an app. It's just code. If they're making the pieces of it in another country, I can just use those same pieces here. They're not gonna go bad in transit. It's not fruit. So you can outsource your app. It's something you can do. Again, as a Canadian developer, I'm biased. You should use local, we're organic, fair trade, right? Local, non-GMO. But again, outsourcing is something that my biggest recommendation is find references, make sure they're legitimate. It's very easy to get gypped in the simplest term I can use. But you'll receive an app, you're gonna spend X amount of money on it, you're gonna think, wow, this code's gonna do all this great stuff, and then you get it and it doesn't, and then you're just gonna spend it on someone else, potentially from the same country. That's just a hurdle you don't want to go over and over. I don't know, has anybody ever here run on a treadmill and felt like they weren't succeeding? And then the final part is legalities. And this comes from outsourcing. Again, there are going to be things that are different in different countries. They're going to be able to do different things, or may not be able to do different, or may not be able to do certain things that we can do here in Canada. So one often misconception is that the Canadian store, things have to be French. No, nothing has to be French. That's not, don't worry about that. If you're building and you're like, oh, it's helpful to have French, but that's not a requirement. Whereas in America, one of the requirements is that you have to be able to be on a certain range of devices. Then while this is not a law, it is demanded by Google and Apple. So Canada doesn't tell you that you have to be able to host to iPhone 4. But Apple, because they have a certain amount of devices still in the market that are still getting updates, they're going to say you have to be able to put on the iPhone 4. Oh, well, if you look at the iPhone 6 screen and you look at the iPhone 4 screen, they're very different. Now I've got to make everything smaller and it's got to fit, and if it doesn't, they're going to get upset. So while not a legality, these guidelines, you have to treat them as law, because if they don't like it, it's not going to get posted. Another essential part of legality is copyright. Copyright is a big deal. Copyright, trademarking, and patenting, 3 different things. I recommend you look into them. The Canadian Intellectual Property Office has some great guidelines that I'm not going to stand here and overwrite. Yeah.
Question. So, on that topic, right?
Yeah.
In a mobile app, the only thing you can really own is the code, right?
No.
So what kind of
So a game being the example that came to mind immediately, unless you have a specific example. But in a game, you'll own the art, you'll own the code, you'll own the sound.
Okay.
You won't own the platform it's getting distributed to, but almost the entirety of your app will be yours. In fact, you may have to credit people. So if you've hired an artist and the contract states that we're going to own the art, then you don't necessarily have to credit them.
Mm.
Maybe the contract states that they have to get credited. Then you have to credit them. If you're using free art, what often comes, so I forget the name of the site, but you can download UI and little graphics from the site, and all it demands is credit, and then you can find who the artist is, and often they'll just put an alias, but you still have to put that alias down. So
some other things that I want to point out too. The biggest thing you could own as well as those things is data, right?
Okay.
That doesn't necessarily need to be yours, but that's probably in your privacy policy or terms of use or however that's laid out. And then the other part, when you say code, really what you mean is IP. So that's your IP if you want it to be.
Intellectual property.
Yeah. So.
Okay.
Yeah. Not your internet. I forget what that
Provider.
No, that's IP.
Yeah,
Anyway.
I don't know.
For certain contracting firms, you cannot own the app. They'll own the app, right? Or they'll own certain portions of the code, and then you can own other parts of the code, and it can break down in any way you really want, right? So say you contract out to us, we can own a part of the code, and then you can own another part of the code. Does that make sense?
No, I understand.
So it's kind of who are you dealing with, and how you want to break down who owns what. Like some of the art assets, we might not even own that intellectual property. We're just buying the rights to use it, right?
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that does.
Okay. Okay. So that's part of, this part of this, that's part of this part of the talk where we're trying to, you want to get all your ducks in a row before we start building our app. Then we're going to talk about budget, what it'll cost. So there are a number of things you can do to finance an app and indeed a business in Canada. I don't know if anybody here has heard of Futurepreneur or the Business Development Bank of Canada. Futurepreneur is the government arm of the BDC. Futurepreneur gives out loans. These are loans, not grants. And then there are a number of grants that you can get, especially as students, while you're building an app or starting your business that I recommend looking into, because we did not. I'll tell you, if you want to look into those. So then, a reasonable budget, again, if this app is the thing on which your business turns, I don't know if you can put a price on your dream, but someone's going to try. So the problem with it is that you'll have an estimate, and then there will be costs that go down. Just like a contractor, you've ever experienced renovations, or you've ever heard that, you budget 10 grand, it's probably going to be 30. Mainly because just like building or constructing anything physical, you're constructing something digital. And constructing something always has problems, issues, bugs, things that you're going to have to pay to have fixed. If it's the wrong tiles in your kitchen, and the guy put them up, you tell him it's the wrong tiles, he's still going to charge you to take them down. Same here, if you tell us that, oh, this is the wrong color, we're still going to have to charge you to change it. Now again, if you are building your own app and you're trying to learn these things on your own, perhaps that's something you can do. I know how to change a color. And perhaps you have a very specific color in mind that you want to change to. So that, between reasonable and the costs beyond development, again, take estimates with a grain of salt. And, if your business, if you can't afford an app immediately, perhaps it's okay to wait. Or think of a different kind of app that you could build. Perhaps it's a web app. Maybe it's just a normal web page. Maybe you're finding software that's already built that you can retool. If all you want is an overlay, maybe Twitch does it for you. So that leads into what you can afford. Let's say you want an app, and you come to us and you say, I want it to go on iPhones and Android, and it's going to be in the US and Canada, maybe Mexico, and this app is going to live for 2 years on the store, and I need it to handle a little bit of data, memberships, and it's going to have in-app purchases. I'll tell you right now, that app's going to probably cost you about $20,000 just for development, maybe for the first 3 months of support. Think of that number. That's, is that a number that you could live with? And remember, it's not just a lump sum at the beginning. This is going to be a protracted cost. Which leads us to the point I made earlier, that every little change you see in an app, how often have you seen Gmail change? I think I've seen Gmail change 6 times. Every time that app gets changed, Google has had to pay its developers to make every little change. Did the menu go from the top to, slightly from the top? Well, some code monkey sat there and made that change, and Google paid for it. So, the same thing's gonna happen with you and your app. You might want some change, it's gonna cost some money. Again, unless, you learn to make some changes yourself. Which leads us to our next slide, which is, ways apps make money. So these are the five ways listed in the Apple guideline, the Apple App Store guidelines. So they're gonna have purchases, data tracking, subscriptions, advertisements, and an upfront cost. Who is unfamiliar with one or all of these? We should have all at least experienced some as consumers.
Data tracking and research.
So that's Facebook giving you a free app, but then taking data that you're putting into the app and selling it to a third party.
Like the Russians.
Yeah. Well, they're paying. Okay, so in-app purchases are some of the most highly regulated forms, even more than data tracking, due to the more recent case of EA Battlefront. Does anybody know what happened with that game? Okay, EA, one of the largest game developers, decided to try and put all 5 of these in one platform. So users would pay $70 up front, and then in the game they would have to pay for more smaller items, which they would then track how often they were buying things, which they would then sell. And then you could buy almost monthly. They were coming out monthly add-ons to the game, which constituted a subscription, and then inside of it, you could get ads for the subscription. So, I guess somebody said, let's just do it all in one. And what happened was the EU at least cracked down hard. Yeah, EA's Battlefront no longer has all 5 of these options. And very importantly, if you are going to put in in-app purchases, let's say you want to run a charity and you want to take donations. In my app, I can refer you to a site like Patreon. Patreon cannot be in my app taking its own or using its own code to accept payment. It'll have to go through Apple or Google, which means that they'll take their cut, which for Google's case is 10%, Apple's is 30%. So, you want to be cognizant of that in your apps, yeah.
Okay, so again on that topic, right? If 5 raises flags, would you say like maybe 2 is a good number?
Yeah. Okay. Sure.
2 or 3?
You've seen that. You bought an app for maybe $5, and then they still had in-app purchases.
Okay.
Right.
I'm talking more like maybe like a subscription and in-app purchase.
Sure. Yeah.
Purchases.
Yeah. Okay. Again, the subscription will be in the app as a recurring in-app purchase.
Okay.
Right, and then you'll just have
So can you tell me more about the cut which Google or Apple takes and the channel you mentioned earlier? How much do they charge?
Okay. So Google will take 10% off of what they'll call a threshold, which is, so if your app has very few, they'll probably just, so let's say an app made $3, you'll get $2.80 back because of the threshold. So as I understand it, Google is taking total number of sales you've had in a month, and then they're creating a minimum off of that. So it's like how credit cards float you a certain amount of money. You don't get paid instantly. It's a similar thing. Every month you'll get 1 check from Google instead of, let's say you have 1,000 in-app purchases, you're getting 1,000 checks. So the threshold will be based off of how many sales you'll have that month, which, again, Google is calculating it based off of, because let's say you have like 6 different kinds of sales. Let's say it was like $100 at $6, $400 at $5. So they'll take that and they'll give you it's not an average, it's a median. A median, it's the middle number.
Lowest number.
Yeah.
Median.
So they'll give you a median. Once you hit that median, then they'll pay out they'll pay out the total in the account. So what that means is that if the median from last month is higher than the median from this month, you may have to wait a little longer, and then it'll recalculate. So the median will change for next month. What that might mean is if your sales go up the next month, then the median will go up again. And as you see, your threshold keeps changing. And so off of that total that Google's giving you, they're taking 10%. Apple also has, Apple doesn't do the median, they just take your total sales for each month, and then they take 30% and give you 70%. Any further questions on that point?
Thank you.
Okay. So, data tracking. Data tracking is the next most heavily regulated form of making money from your app. Again, you have to be very careful what you are tracking in terms of data. My recommendation, do not track children's data. Just don't do it. It's very difficult to do it legally. And unless it's necessary for your app, I just recommend against it. Your app will most likely not pass all of the different rating systems, particularly in Europe. But adult is fine. No, we can agree to anything. so that, it's gravy there. Subscriptions, there is an upper limit to what your subscriptions can be. I forget what they are off the top of my head for Apple and Google. Again, if you're building on something that isn't a phone, a lot of these issues go away. If you're distributing for, let's say you want to put it on only Windows devices, so basically computers, then in-app purchase, having most of these in one app, Windows isn't going to have a huge deal with. But again, Windows will let you use a third-party in-app purchaser. So maybe you got to think about that. If Apple's taking too big of a cut, maybe most of your target market is on Windows anyway. They have a computer and a phone. Maybe you just put it on their computer, or consider the web app. Well, phones are very powerful. Are getting more and more powerful now, and data connections are getting very, quite fast. So it might be worth just building out a web page that can, do almost anything now. Web pages can access cameras, can access hardware. It might be worth it. Advertisements, nobody likes them, but they're there. One thing to be careful of when you're doing advertisements, if you're buying advertising packages, and let's say you're advertising, a vegan membership app, and you bought an advertising package, and in that advertising package comes a dairy ad, that may not be the best look for your app. So, just be careful of what advertising packages you're buying. Most of them will tell you who's advertising in the packages, and you can choose who you want and who you don't. But again, be careful. Don't just agree to things. And the upfront cost. Unless you're trying to penetrate the market through cost, choose something that's fair. Most apps are $1 because of people trying to penetrate the market. So now most apps sell for $1, at least games. But if your app does do a lot of technical things, and maybe you have a very complex word processor in your app, it might be worth it to consider what the actual cost of your app is, and not just try to market penetrate by selling $1. So those are the 5 ways apps make money. Are there any questions? No? All right, we're going to move on.
I'm gonna make a point here, actually. We touched on it really briefly here. When you're thinking about ways your app makes money and where it's going to make money, keep in mind what region you have in mind for your app to be available. Like, say, for example, you want to put your app up on the Apple Store. They're going to ask you almost country by country to tick off where you want your app to be available. And if you do that, it's going to be assumed that you are complying with whatever rules are in those countries or regions. And if you don't, Apple might just reject you. So, there's tons of places you could release. I would almost recommend just launching it in places that like Canada, North America is pretty easy. But make sure to do a little bit of research on that, because depending on the region, it might be more or less difficult to make your app compliant. Like if you want to release your North American app in China, you might have to redo like half of it. Whereas if you want to release your Canadian app in the US, there's almost no difference. So just keep that in mind, I would say.
Okay, all right, let's move on to, there's no questions on that point, is it? Okay, all right.
What about lottery items?
Lottery items. How did we forget to talk about this?
Okay, yeah.
So some of you may be aware that recently, again in the EU, they're really taking a harsh stance on anything perceived to be gambling in your app. And that's not even necessarily just like gambling. It's not necessarily a poker playing app. If your app has anything you can buy that will give you something random, like if you look up like a loot box online, you'll see what I'm talking about. Any randomized purchase would kind of fall under this category. This is changing presently, so I can't give you an exact verdict on what to do in this situation. Keep an eye on it if your app is going to include any paid randomized elements and is going to be in the EU. They have been banned from certain countries. Off the top of my head, Belgium has locked out a couple of them. Up until this point, it's still kind of on a country-by-country basis, even though the EU is going over it as a whole. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. It hasn't really started yet in North America. There's reason to believe it might. Practices like these have gone to court in the States, I think, once or twice. So definitely think hard on that, because the inclusion of gambling or what is perceived as gambling in your app might make you beholden to a whole new set of regulations that's just starting to come into play for apps. That was a good question. Thank you.
Okay. Next slide. Oh yeah, what goes into that that isn't part of development?
Yeah, so this is kind of our lessons learned for after making so many apps. Like we started off with Farmony, which is a game, and then we did several interactives with Roddy. And these are some things we want you should think about before you just jump in. The first one I always push is the platform. So a platform is what store, what kind of computer are you trying to put this on? We've mostly been talking about like Google and the Apple Store, right? But those aren't the only ones. Since we're all gamers and we made a game, I know a lot of the gaming stores, so like Origin, Steam, there's a whole host of those, right? There's also, Epic Games. There's also the Windows Store. There's also the Apple Store, like for desktops. There's a lot of different platforms that you can just release on, depending on who your target audience is. So you're not going to make a baking app and put that on Steam. That's probably not a good idea. But the one that reaches probably the widest audience across the board is your web browser, right? Everything has a web browser. Like any computer, anything that does anything can use a web browser. And this is a standard that everyone tries to meet. So if you want to reach the largest audience, it's probably your best bet. And not everyone's going to want to download your app immediately, right? That's why Facebook still has a web app, right? Even on phones.
And if we want to reach the young people, what kind of platform do you recommend?
Young people?
Like between 18 and 30?
Oh, okay. So I was thinking like children.
No.
Can you be a little more specific than that?
Young professional.
It sounds pretty wide. Like you're probably gonna want to go with something standard like the Apple Store, Google Store, and a web browser kind of thing.
We're trying to reach youth from the age of 16 to 25.
16.
Yes, or
To 25.
And just where?
um,
Anywhere in particular?
Or what specifically
And then-
does your app do?
specific. So we're trying to educate them on a specific topic, and we're trying to create some sort of game for them to learn this, not just the regular module and answer questions. And mostly in the GTA area.
So yeah, something on the website. Like I'm not trying to like belittle your idea, but why can't it be a blog, right?
Is it the idea that they'll read or watch some kind of information and then they'll be able to answer a quiz? Is it like educational oriented?
We're trying to create something on the format of a visual novel
Okay.
game,
Mm-hmm.
sort of thing.
Are you guys gonna be putting out like regular updates, like oh, we've got a new story for you every 6 months or something.
That could be an option, yeah.
Okay.
Is it something you're trying to sell as a game or as like a little interactive, and then you want to push more information on them?
A little interactive, I want to push more information
Oh,
on them,
okay.
so they
So
learn.
you're probably gonna want to do a website, and depending on where your budget is, you could go put it on some of the other app stores.
If it's GTA, one of the benefits of an app is that it can be offline. The TTC is notoriously terrible Wi-Fi, so maybe a website isn't something they can access on their commute regularly. So that's the benefit of an app, is that it's offline. That's one of the major benefits of an app, is that you can do it when I don't have signal.
Okay, so talking about like apps and having access offline, right? Is that kind of like the same as like a progressive web app? So it's like a web-based platform, but it can be accessed like I believe through an app.
Sorry, a progressive app.
Yeah, progressive web app.
Yeah, essentially, it's I understand like it's like a skinned website, right? Like it'll be like a website, but it has the functions of an app directly from the
Exactly.
phone,
Yeah. So it's like come directly download to your home screen.
Yeah, so
So once you download a web page, it's on your phone. As long as it's not making any calls, it'll work fine, right? It's like when you download something you want to read, and then you go in the subway, and then you no longer have data. You can keep looking at it, right?
Yeah. That's
As long as it doesn't need the connection.
Yeah, so like your banking app needs a constant connection, but maybe Audible doesn't. It'll have a certain amount of buffer. But then, do you have a specific reason for asking that question? Like,
yeah, because for my app, like I have a music streaming app.
Okay.
I'm planning on releasing it on the iOS and Android store.
Okay.
Because two biggest phones, I figure people have most of those.
Yeah.
But yeah, so because it's music streaming, it's going to be online streaming and offline streaming,
Okay.
and I'm just trying to find a way to encompass both.
Okay. Well,
Sorry, offline streaming.
Yeah, offline streaming, so you don't have to be connected to an internet source and still have access to music that's already been downloaded to your phone.
right. So essentially, it's like the offline mode
Yeah.
for Netflix or Spotify.
Yeah, exactly.
So, does anybody remember what year Netflix came out with? They were no longer doing DVD delivery, but now they were doing actual browser streaming. I think it was 2013, something like that. It wasn't until I want to say 2017, 2016, but like it was a good chunk of time until you were allowed to download content. One of the reasons for that is because there are a lot of hurdles so what you're going to do is you're going to have content on the phone for that period that it's offline streaming. It'll be for all intents and purposes on the phone. And so what you're going to need is that's a lot of licensing issues that you may have to jump to. And it might be easier to just make it online streaming, because then you can say that you've retained ownership for the entirety of in music they call it the performance, even if it was performed only in your ears and by a machine. So that's something that you might want to take a look into.
But question, so for the rights on the music though, in order to have the music like at all, don't you already have to have those rights to the
No,
songs?
there are progressive licenses.
Okay.
Right. So that's why Spotify has a progressive license, where if you have it for free, you have a very limited access to their library.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna talk about that.
So
But if that's not an issue, then
if you jump that hurdle, then you have
One thing I do want to keep pushing, I think we're going to push this the entire presentation, is just put it on a web browser. It's a lot easier to do, and it reaches the widest audience, and it's a standard everyone's trying to achieve or trying to meet, to just view a web page.
Is it a cheaper option overall than building like an actual app in the app store to have like a web browser based version? Like easier to make, like overall cost, maintenance, like upkeep, that kind of stuff? Or is it about the same?
Uh,
I don't know, I know it's obvious to what you're doing, but
I would probably say cheaper, if only because you don't have to jump through the regulatory hoops of the App Store.
Maybe
It saves a
just
bit of
in
your time.
Yeah, you're really just get a domain. You're gonna
Yeah.
host that.
cheaper for time.
You're right. Yeah, exactly. Right.
Okay.
Good
but
uploading to the Android store is pretty simple.
Yeah, if it's Android, it's fast too.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, you know, I mean,
It also depends on who your developers are and what they know, right?
Okay, I have a question about, because you're talking about having it on the web, right? I don't know if this is true, but I've acquired knowledge that if you have it on the web versus having it on the native app, that there's a little bit less security issues, that it's more reachable if it's on the web versus having it native.
A friend of mine once told me this: if I can touch it, I can own it. Like, there's always going to be vulnerabilities.
So don't believe that?
It's hard to say unless you're really in the security field. Maybe there's a difference.
I think your question is more oriented towards the audio aspect of it, right? I mean, what Spotify, for example, does, like you can listen to the stream if you're online, but if you download it to your phone, you can listen to it on your phone, but you can't download it from the phone because it's encoded specifically to play only on the Spotify app. That doesn't stop somebody from having a microphone and a stereo system and record it directly from the phone or plug it in directly with the.
Yeah, and when I was talking about security, I more so meant like for my paid users.
Like somebody's, oh, okay.
And like someone can fish their account.
Yeah, I mean like credit card information, names, date of birth, stuff like that.
That's more up to your back end, if anything, which I guess we'll touch on later. But you typically wouldn't store that information on their phone, right? Like they're gonna authenticate on the phone, or on the website or whichever. So that's another question.
Yeah, so when you mentioned there are so many, difficulties that we face in app development and how it's more convenient on the website and even cheaper. So why do people opt for building an app? Like what separates an app?
Why would you
Because
build
I think
on?
most of the functionalities which, for example, Spotify or Netflix give, they also give it on the browser, but they still promote the app big time. So what's the main reason for that?
There's always a performance hit when you're running it on a web browser because you're running through 3 virtual machines, right? So
a virtual machine.
do we really want to get into that?
Line down the rabbit.
Yeah, why not?
A virtual machine, it's kind of like an interpreter. It creates this environment that is standardized across the board. So that's why Java works on your phone, it works on your laptop, and it works, I guess, anything really, right? Similar with Python and other languages like that. They're creating this environment that's similar across the board so you can run the same code. It makes life a lot easier to be cross-platform. That's why your web browser is cross-platform. Everything has a web browser. You can put it on a Raspberry Pi kind of thing. So I think
let's use an analogy to explain that. So, who here has ever played Broken Telephone? And who here has ever played that game perfectly? Okay. So if I got a broken telephone, your movie from me around the room to Jared, there might be an issue. We might not get there perfectly, right? So now computers are not dumb like humans, so they're passing on that message perfectly. But the amount of if Jared just had the movie, if I was able to just walk across the room and give Jared the movie, wouldn't that be a lot easier than having to send it to all of you to him? So that's what a website is doing, right? The information is in one place, and it has to get to another place virtually, because he's never going to actually have that information. He's just going to view it, right? So that's the performance that we're talking about. We're talking about the fact that your phone has to be able to spy on a server where the information is, rather than having it, if I had to watch a movie from 60 feet away versus me having it on in front, I'm not going to be able to relay that information perfectly from 60 feet away. Does that kind of answer the question a little bit? Okay.
Yeah, there's other benefits too to having an app because it's direct access to hardware. So what that means is your camera, your microphone, those kinds of things are a lot easier to access than through a web browser. Because you'll notice when you use Google Hangouts or something, you have to download a specific codec or something special to make it work. But yeah, are there any more questions? Cool. So how many of you already have a business running right now?
I'll say yes and no.
Yes and no. Okay. So for those of you that are running a business, you'll understand this. Like you're going to be working 2 jobs. For a lot of us, that's true because this is like, this is sort of a side hustle, right? So that means you're really going to break down. You're going to have to choose how you're going to break down your time, right? Like you're not going to be able to do it all. And even if this is your only job, it's going to feel like working 2 jobs if you're able to put the time in, because there's always going to be something more you can do, something more you can improve on, and you're just going to I guess we just want to warn you that's going to take a lot of effort and something's going to give, right? Like it's going to be your social life or your time or your money kind of thing. Yeah, depending on what how far you're willing to go and how much it means to you. And that's really been true for us. And kind of hand in hand with that is like the gas time and meetings. Like just because you're not getting paid for it doesn't mean that you should go do it, right? Like you can go to a client meeting and that could give you a lot of money in the long run if it doesn't give you money up front, right? So that's more time, which is money that you have to put into these things, right? Which kind of leads into the personal sacrifice. Like something is going to give, and that's up to you what you want it to do. A fun adage I heard is a business will fail because you give up, which makes sense, right? But you can always keep on putting more time in to get it to work and keep hustling to get the business to where you need it to be. But if you give up, it's never going to get there, right? I'm going to hand it off to Christian to tell a bit about the story of why looks matter, I guess.
Yeah, well, I'll end on your point actually and clarify as well that and I'll touch on this a little bit later as well. Just because you can put an endless amount of time into your business doesn't necessarily mean that doing so will cause it to succeed. So, please, for your health and sanity, be aware of when it's like obviously not really working for you. There's obviously no shame in kind of taking some of your time off it if it's just sucking up your whole life and not going anywhere. That's a tough place to draw the line, honestly. Like, I don't know if we even know where the line is. We're just kind of like feeling it out.
Yeah, there's a question.
Yes.
Some of the questions just like touch on what you're saying, but technically, like if you dedicate your time to it, that's fine, right? As long as you're like doing what I've heard people refer to as like the critical inch, which is basically like you're putting your time into something that's actually gonna make a difference instead of doing stuff that will just make you seem busy. Well, so that's acceptable then, right?
Yes, I mean, as long as it's not driving you crazy, as long as you're not working like 22-hour days and you're like gonna pass out at the end of each one. That's mainly what I'm talking about here. Just manage your time as best you can, I guess. And yeah, try to keep it on something that will actually make a difference. I'll touch on that later too in more depth. But yes.
So I'm trying to build like a recruiting platform for employers and temporary workers, mainly like staffing agencies. I'm trying to start it on a web-based app. So I just wanted to like kind of understand the key features that I want to have in it is filtering through applicants by the demographic profile, their ratings, and their availability, which would have their calendar on their profile. I just wanted to see like you guys have any like estimate in time, how long that would take, what I would need to do in terms of
We're trying to sit down and figure out.
In terms of research, I would definitely say research the demographic aspect that you mentioned, because
demographic being sex, age, like certain
so even sex and gender right now is being contested in the States as to whether that's something that you can advertise to or not. So I get that your platform is not necessarily an advertisement platform, but it's something I might look into just because there's some scrutiny coming around on not showing certain hits to people of a certain demographic on purpose, or showing them to a certain demographic on purpose. That's kind of evolving now. For research, I'd say definitely look at that. Otherwise, there are other staffing agencies that we're aware of, actually quite a few we've come into contact with. And a few of them actually have online web portals that list jobs the way you described, and information about them, including kind of the pay grade. So you can go out there and Google, like, let's say Procom, for example, is one off the top of my head. Creative Group is another one. Those are two that I've looked at recently. They might give you an idea of what that kind of site looks like and the kind of information that's presented and how, just like how their little search engine works. Like, it's probably pretty simple. You just search by, Bernard, do you have more insightful information?
Sure.
I'm pretty much done.
Okay, yeah, there's also a couple more platforms. If you're looking for something that would probably, you could build on, somebody that's already done all the work, there's a couple of engines that run like that, Trello, and there's something called Natural Insight, which actually has an app where you can sign in and you can find job through it. It depends on what trade you're in, but I've seen the managing side of it, and yeah, you're able to sort through so many applicants. You're able to see their availability. They're able to download the app. They're able to see if you book them for a specific date in the next couple of weeks. They can see it on the app. They can get reminders, and you don't have to build that app from scratch. You just pay a certain subscription fee, and they'll let you have access to the platform. It's even becoming so prominent that people have an NI score, an NI standing for Natural Insight, which is the platform, and it'll say, this person has an 85% rating, and you know that they'll be there on time most of the time, right? So it's kind of like an Uber rating of sorts, but yeah, if what you're looking for is a platform that can help you sort through people that have certain specific skills, then you can build on that, let's say.
So I know about Natural Insights, they were my competitors. How, like, what's a estimate in terms of building a Natural Insight? What would be like a estimate? Just the web-based app, not the mobile with like the iOS and Android.
So you want to compete against Natural Insight? Okay, that's really interesting. That's ambitious. So again, if you build something from scratch, then you're looking at several hundreds, possibly thousands of hours, man-hours of code to recreate something like that, right?
Minus the GPS, minus login.
I think that's, obviously you can eventually build on those features, but if you want, let's say like a low-cost prototype, if you're at that stage, you might want to consider WordPress with a number of plugins that might give you those efficiencies. But if you're ready to jump into like the building app space, then again, and this number that Alberta gave earlier, and I'm not sure if you were here for that, but he threw out the number of around $20,000, and to me that sounded like mind-blowing. But then when you think about it over the course of a number of months or years, you're easily going to go through that number, especially with something as ambitious as a competitor to Natural Insight. You're probably looking at something that will require some upfront costs just to get developers and designers and UI experts aligned to create that platform. But by all means, let's talk.
Somebody recommended Iconic to me.
Okay.
Is that like a path that I should go towards?
I've never actually used Iconic. Is that also a second?
No. Iconic is like a development portal. I'm not sure. The developer told me that Iconic, you start on a web-based app, and then you can now. Have you guys heard of Iconic?
It's not a language, right? You
Sounds like a framework.
No, either.
I'm not a developer, so.
Yeah.
Google already.
So,
Sorry,
okay.
can you describe it a little more?
So, like what I was told from the developer is Iconic is a platform that you can code and you create, the code for the website, and then you can now take that same code for the website and use it for developing Android and iOS apps.
So like a Wix that you then apply to like apps is like the new idea. Okay.
So,
Open source coding.
So who here missed the beginning? Who here was not here? Okay, because the workshop, today's presentation will be broken up into two parts. We're going through app administration right now. Very shortly, we're going to go through app development, which is both our process, and then we'd like to workshop an app with you. We've heard a bunch of good ideas. We're going to choose one, think about it, and maybe we can answer some of your questions as we go. And someone's going to Google Iconic.
It sounds a lot like
Ionic?
I still haven't heard of it though.
No, it rings a bell.
It sounds similar to what we use, which is Unity, which is just a cross-platform framework. So it allows us to develop for like Android, iOS, as well as
HTML5.
as well as Tizen. Anyway.
Alright, so I'm just gonna, like, you guys are getting really invested in the kind of development aspect, which is good, by the way, so much so that it makes almost these next 2 points kind of irrelevant. That's fine. I'm just gonna blow through them really quick so
He
we can
wants
get
to
to
say
development.
them anyway.
This almost applies to like any startup business, but changes a little bit if you're doing software development or an app. So website, social media, and business profile. What's a business profile? That's basically a statement of what your business or what your business's apps are going to do for your consumers, clients, investors, what have you. Normally, this was like 100 years ago. This is the kind of thing you probably express at a face-to-face meeting with a client or consumer or what have you. Now, a big part of your first impression is actually going to be when people go visit your website. A website's actually kind of a big deal, and I didn't know that. Turns out even government agencies will go straight to your website to find out more about what you do and who you are. So think about how that might be useful to you, how that might help your app or your business reach the people you want to meet. Same goes for social media. The social media compared to a website is like a lot of work. Like to actually manage and keep content updating that's something you might even consider like hiring someone to do. It's also something you'll probably be more interested in if your app is more B2C or business to consumer. If you're kind of a B2B business or you're doing B2B apps or programs, the website will probably do enough for you. Businesses, from our experience and research so far, like to go looking at your website. They like to see pictures of you if they can, which leads to the last point, which is dress code, which is actually kind of a contentious issue. I don't know if you guys have seen like Silicon Valley or whatever, where like software developers can like show up to work looking like cavemen. And there's the question, does it like add to your cachet as a startup to show up in t-shirt and jeans? Or do you want to like dress for success, as they say? I've gone back and forth on this a lot with a few people, and it seems like my best advice to you is keep in mind who your audience is. Again, if you're going for the attention of businesses, if you want to sell your app to businesses, they might want to see a certain kind of person on your website. If you're making an app for younger people, if you're making an app for consumers, maybe looking casual is going to do a lot of good work for you. But that's something to think about. It's not quite cut and dry. So I think we're going to move on to development at this point.
Yeah. Oh my god. Okay. All right. Okay. Yeah. And this is the final graphic that we're going to leave you with.
So what happened a lot with our first game is we bit off more than we could chew kind of thing. And I thought we started small. So that's where I want to start with scope. Figure out how big you want your app to be. And I always say start off small and then cut down a little more. Because as long as you can get, even if it's just one feature, start with that, get it working, and then you can build more later, right? It'll save you in the long run or well, in the short run, right? If you can just build something that's small and proof of concept, right? Because as your scope gets bigger, and as you can see in the graphic, it costs more time and money. And if you don't have one of those, something else is going to give, right? So if you want to get rid of cost, quality is going to go down. But if you still want good quality, you're going to have to spend more time, or it might just, or if you can't do it, it's going to come back to money, that kind of thing.
All right, so let's do app development. So that was getting all your ducks in a row. Now we're going to talk about how the sausage gets made. And this is in particular our process. This doesn't have to be your process. This is a very organic process. You're going to go back and forth along this little graphic we have here. The 3Ds of app development. Basically go design, you develop, and then you distribute. Those are the three basic phases. Don't think of them as being, etched in stone. But before I get into them, does anybody need a break? All right. Here we go. So we're not. What was that? You want it? Too bad. Here we go. So we're going to start on design. So we we have 5 points here on design, core concepts, your app feel, your UI, UX, the team you're gonna use, and then finally, hopefully you've chosen your platform by the time you're done designing.
Yeah, so I'll just quickly speak to this because I'm a designer by trade. So essentially, I've developed a bunch of apps with these guys and with other developers as well. And it always comes to the backbone of your project is essentially going to be designed, right? That's where you're going to be able to make the most mistakes the fastest, so that you discover what works, what doesn't, what could be made better. So starting with core concepts, we have some slides following up that will show you a little bit this more in depth. But it's essentially the combination of colors, fonts, graphics, videos, and all those elements that are going to make your app look, if it's a banking app that you're looking to develop, it's going to make it look trustworthy. If it's a medical app, it's got to look sleek. If it's a game, it's got to look fun, right? So there's all these elements to consider. And basically, all these components are going to form something that is going to be the user interface. And a successful user interface is essentially something that's going to allow your user, your end user, to achieve their goal in the least amount of steps and as flawlessly as possible. It's something that's going to essentially get somebody to stream the movie that they want to, or transfer the funds from one account to another, or record a song successfully. For like more examples, right? And that's when you, this is part of also getting your ducks in a row. You have to have your development team aligned. You want to have your graphic designers, your 3D designers, your developers, and that is where these guys come in. Jared can probably talk a little bit more about the app development team itself. Or
I'll say a couple words about that.
Yeah.
Another aspect of design is, especially if you're a startup and you want to make an app from scratch, you're really going to be the person who decides who's on the team. You're going to have to think about the kind of skills that you need for your particular app. And it might not be as cut and dry as like, I need artists to draw everything, I need someone to make the sound, and then I need me to program. Like say, for example, like going through school, you had a really tough time studying for your LSATs. You want to make an app that helps students study for their LSATs. So who's going to advise on your law tips? Obviously not you, because you had trouble with your LSATs. That's why you're making an app. Do you need somebody who actually went through law school to help you with that? Is that something you can afford? Is that something that you should be looking into now or at a later stage in development in order to manage your costs? So really even down to like what your app is specifically trying to do, there are going to be different kind of spheres of influence you're going to want to look into for who is going to be an integral part of your team and who's going to be something you can afford to just maybe outsource later, somebody you can contract, somebody you can just ask for help as a favor. We'll get into that. So really keep in mind, like think outside the box a bit when you're thinking about how to make your app. Think about the more complex concepts that you might not be able to address on your own. I think Jared wants to talk about platform here. Is that right?
Oh, we kind of touched on this.
Any questions about platform?
or
No?
UI.
No? Any questions about UI, UX?
We'll
there's
do
a-
some examples now.
Oh, yeah. Again, with UI and UX, there are a lot of standards that you're probably going to want to adhere to. Like the gear is now just means settings. 3 lines in a row just means more menus. If you mess with those, I can guarantee you people will find it confusing. Unless you're either it's branded content or a game. Usually games get away with it. Where like the wizard will be the menu. I don't know, if you're making something, for example, your staffing app, I sincerely doubt that you would want to mess with UI standards. So,
Okay, can I give you guys an example just because it will help me, right?
sure.
So if you look at like other music streaming apps, they have a shuffle button, right? However, the shuffle button, two cross lines,
Yeah.
right? Now, I was used to music production before I started this venture for the app, right?
Sure.
And I know just from experience that that's actually the wrong symbol. That's actually a crossfade symbol. So
Okay.
on my app, what I want to do is actually make it like my own symbol because that is not, I don't want it to be wrong. So
Right.
would that mess with standards or?
Well,
would that-
okay, so that's interesting, because, well, for one reason, depending on the studies you've done before, and if you're making a music streaming app for producers who will know your symbol, they'll be like, hey, that's great, someone's using the right symbol. But if your target demographic is a very broad demographic, then I do recommend sticking to UI standards.
Or come up with something in your design that will help people understand that that's what it means. Because you just told me that right now, and I believe you, but I had no idea that that was the truth before you just told me.
Yeah,
And if
and
you
like,
showed me your app right now and it had whatever the symbol actually is, I would immediately be asking, what the heck is that?
Well, I can tell you what I'm changing to. What I'm changing to is basically like a small play button, like the play button triangle, like sideways, and a question mark next to it. Because you don't know what's coming on, but you're gonna play something.
All right.
I might have intuited that.
That's not as confusing as I imagined. But even something as simple as maybe just like putting like the word shuffle above it, like that can just make the world of difference when it comes to confusing people and not confusing people.
Yeah. Well, I'm actually trying not to put words and trying to put symbols so that way it's more
Right,
recognizable
again,
across
but again,
languages.
when it comes into the symbology of apps, there are genuinely recognized UI standards. And most of them have come out of best practices, like, the gear wasn't always settings, Apple just had that on their iPhone 1, that's what became settings, right?
Like, we're not telling you don't do it or that it's a bad idea, and you don't even have to use words. Like, there's a bunch of ways you could tackle this problem. Like, you could have like the symbol, and then the background of your app is in 2 colors, and behind that symbol they cross over each other. No words, nothing to explain, but just the design itself might help people zero in on what that's supposed to be relative to what they already know.
You could also run the user through a small tutorial on firing up the app in the first time, right? That says, if you want random music, click the play button with the question mark, right?
Yeah, I'm gonna have those like little 10-second videos.
Well, then that, puts that out of question.
But I mean, that like you set you apart, maybe that's something you want to do.
That's also something you might want to make like the core concept of your app. Like that might be what you want it to be all about almost. Like it's something that's going to be novel to so many people. It kind of deserves focus in where it is in your app design, in some way.
Okay, so questions about design. Now we're gonna move, this is phase 1, phase 2 is development. Ideally, you've gamed out as much of your app as possible. Now when you get to this is yeah, hey, look at that.
So
This is the beginning of your app.
I can speak to this pretty good. When the JACL team started developing their game Harmony, they came to me with some mock-ups that they had made that seemed very preliminary, right? So what I started doing was breaking down some of those elements into an interface that looked a little bit less confusing, although this looks pretty confusing, it is already. So this is just a direct representation of what they had handed to me. It was an effort to get all those icons in the screen lined up, maybe given them proper proportions in the screen so that you'd be able to find the options that you needed. So there's also other elements. All these items maybe wouldn't show up on screen up on start, but if you press a certain button or if you start from the left, they come up. Maybe whenever you tap on one of these, this menu would slide right back up, and just trying to eliminate certain elements from being on the screen at all times so that you have a clean interface and you only get to those menu items when you really need them or when they become relevant, right? Otherwise, it just becomes a cluster mess of just icons and colors on the screen, right?
So the next slide should be, okay. So this is a small app that is entirely gamed out. Okay, so this is what we mean. So this is an app that uses motion detection camera to interact with a TV, and the idea is that you'll interact with this girl who's on the TV through using the motion detection camera. So what this chart shows you is this is a UI chart where it shows you all the triggers and all the associated UI from start to finish in your app. Now, in a more complex app like a banking app, this might be huge, right? Every button, every conclusion that a user can end up at. This might be like 100 to 150 interactions long, right? We have 5 branches here, And so again, this is a fairly simple app, but this is something that you might want to think about. Maybe not doing in full, but definitely doing in part, right? You really want to know where every button leads, what every button does, because if the developer doesn't know, the developer is going to assume, the developer's probably going to get it wrong. You're probably going to tell the developer to fix it, and that's going to be cost that's added on to the initial estimate. So, keep this chart in mind when we start going through the app workshop where we're actually getting at. So development. Once again, 5 points.
So I'll start off, and I mentioned this earlier, the front end and the back end to any app. Most of our games actually are only front end. That means all the logic, all the mechanics or workflow, that's all just on the phone or on the device. Hopefully not getting too technical here, but if you just want to, calculate some numbers like your calculator, it's only front end, right? You're just punching numbers in and something comes out, right? And that's all UI, and that's where you'll need a designer to make it look good, because if I make it, you're gonna get the first screen that you saw, and I think it's super functional. I know how it works, but everyone else is gonna be confused. And then if you want your app to start doing more complicated things, such as holding user data, authenticating, so if you want the user to be able to log in somewhere, and you want them to store data and then pick it up on store it on their phone and then pick it up on their laptop, that's all gonna be backend. It needs to go into the cloud somewhere and then be saved for the user to pick up later on. And these are all things that you're gonna have to think about in your core concept, right? Is it going to need a front end, is it going to need a back end, right? If you can get away without saving any data, if that's not part of your core concept, then you can build a prototype a lot faster, and then you can start showing it to people. And then you can add on a backend later, right? But there are issues with that, and intrinsic to not having a backend means it's not going to be networked, right? You're not going to be able to communicate to anyone else. It's not going to have anything to do with the cloud, that kind of thing. So those are some things you need to think about when you're designing, and if it does have a backend, you're probably going to need more than just one developer. Or if you can only pay for one developer, it's going to take a lot more time. And Christian, you want to talk about contractors artwork?
Yeah, so we actually talked about this between us before doing this presentation. The question kept coming up, why is this under development and not design? Does anybody have any guesses as to the one major factor why we ended up putting this here? Yeah, or contracting help or artwork. So
Because it takes time.
that's very close. That's very close to where I'm getting. So if you have the resources to bring like a contract artist or a full-time artist onto your team at the stage of design to help you get through those kind of screens that we just showed you, that may be very beneficial. But if you're a startup, those resources might not be readily available. Like art is expensive. I'll be the first one to tell you right now. And it's expensive because it takes time. So the reason we put this here is that in our startup case, we ended up organizing all of our design documents before seeking any contractors or artwork. This actually worked pretty well. The reason for that is that there's actually quite a lot you can do to prepare your design before seeking out either contractors or artists. So what are some of the things you can do? Start doing research. In terms of what your app is visually going to look like, start collecting reference images. What I mean by that, just go on Google Images, Google things that you imagine your app is kind of like, copy those images like onto a document and start saving all of those. At the point where you get an artist to help you, their first question is going to be, what exactly do you want me to do? What is this going to look like? And if you don't have images like that, you may find yourself kind of at a loss for words. That said, if you can express what you want design-wise, start a design document. What a design document is, it's basically a giant, horrible 10-page or more Word document where you write down every single thing about your app. Every single thing it does, if possible, how it's going to do it, how you plan to execute those things, anything you can think of that will be relevant to the creation and development of the app itself could go into that document. That'll help you a lot, not only in guiding your artists and contractors to doing what you need them to do, but also if at a later stage of development you start to forget exactly what you wanted in the first place, then at least you have a record. Let me see if there's anything else I want to say about this. Oh, yes. Consider doing some of the art assets yourself. Like, I understand that probably a lot of people here aren't artists, but if you just need like little things, like you need a little button or a little icon, like take to the internet. There's tons of YouTube tutorials. It can be easier than you think it is, especially if it's something small, and that can be a place where you can kind of convert your time into saving yourself some money. There's tons of resources available for free on that. I can tell you right now, if you go look up GIMP, it's like almost Photoshop. It does almost everything that Photoshop does. For your purposes, it'll probably be great. And YouTube is full of tutorials for it. We use it a lot. There was also another program that we used to make little icons or pixel art called Piskel, Piskel. It's super intuitive and it's great if you need sprites or pixel work of any kind. Those are just some examples.
How do you write your first one?
The first one is GIMP, G-I-M-P, and it's free, and you can get it online.
Sorry, kind of to piggyback on that, where you can eventually convert all your time and save resources or money. There's probably an open source or free version of any major art or productivity tool out there, because a lot of engineers just don't like paying for those sorts of apps. So for an example, Maya 3D Max, their 3D modeling software, you can use Blender if you want to do it for free. And if you do enough Googling, you'll probably eventually find a free version of what you want. But again, if it's you doing it, you're probably not going to get the same quality, or if you want better quality, it's going to take more time. But you got to take that all into consideration, depending on what it is you're looking for.
It's just another area where you can kind of help manage your startup costs for your first app.
Oh, there's a question.
Yes.
Okay, so my question's about the like the artwork, right? So if you like can design things on InDesign and on Illustrator, I heard that once it's designed, someone that is, I guess you say tech savvy, someone else on a code, can actually then plug in code and make that design operational. Is that?
You mean like you want to move something?
Yeah, like for example, like if I design a button on Illustrator, if the button I tap goes to a certain page, you guys can make that transition to a different page.
You can't plug code into Illustrator or InDesign. I think InDesign can do a little bit more in terms of interactivity than Illustrator, but ultimately what you want to do is export. Usually these are just for asset creation, right? So if you need to create a logo or an icon or just a whole interface, buttons, then that's what you use Illustrator for. You then probably, if you're doing it, using it for a website or something like that, you'd probably use the slice tool and slice the hell out of your mockup, and then you can export all those assets to either SVG or PNGs or JPEGs or sprite sheets if you're developing a game with animated characters, and you can have those, then dropped into a platform where you can animate them or there you go.
So yeah, these are spreadsheets.
So I'm not sure these were created with Illustrator. These look more like Photoshop.
I believe it was Photoshop.
Yeah, it was Photoshop. So yeah, well, to your question, I personally use Illustrator and InDesign quite a bit, and I know for sure that I can't plug into any code into this software specifically, but they're a core part of the design of the app. You know what I mean? Like it's not a developer platform Illustrator, but it is something that's going to allow you to create the graphics to create a game or your app.
So I can technically just design the entire UI of the app on Illustrator.
That's
and
what
then
I
have a
Yeah.
team make those operational.
Exactly. So essentially that's going to be like the backbone. That's going to be the design phase of your project, right? Where you're gonna say, okay, screen 1, screen 2, screen 2 takes you to screen 25, if you make the right combination.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking
about. Right, so that's, Illustrator is one of the best tools to get that started because it's gonna be lightweight and it's shareable. And most designers use Illustrator, so you stand a good chance of it being compatible with somebody that's, if you do that yourself or if you have somebody else do it, it's very possible that they also know the way to export it to, for somebody like Jared himself to, take all those icons and all those buttons and make them all, like, give them logic essentially, right?
Yeah, so it'll really depend on what framework you're using, right? But typically, if you build it, you're creating the assets like we're talking about, like these guys, and then someone will program it, but not in like Illustrator, depending on whatever framework you're using to build your app.
So would you say if I did that, that would dramatically cut down on cost? Or would
Are you doing all of it? It kind of depends on where your costs are going to be. If you have a lot of artwork, then it could. If you do it all yourself,
I'd
but
say
it's going to
basically almost all.
you know,
Almost all that I would think that I would do. I mean, I'm sure other people could
there's-
suggest I need more,
yeah,
but I could do that as well.
yeah, it's probably cut down. Fair margin, I would say. That was our biggest expense because we didn't pay for a programmer.
I will say if you can design like pretty much everything in Illustrator and then chop it up into each individual asset you want and export it and give that to your developers, that will probably save you costs because that will then go pretty fast. Whereas if you give them like the entire mock-up, they come back to you, they say we need this to be cut out so that we can play with it. That all adds a surprising amount of time to the development process.
So like if I have 5 buttons on my screen, I should technically send them 6 dots.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is a barn we had made by Bruno for a game. And, we were like, yeah, let's just like make a barn, it'll be great. And that was not the case. This got out of hand very quickly for us. Mainly because all of a sudden we realized it needed snow on it. We were like, why does it need snow? Because there's winter in the game. Oh, damn, it needs snow.
That's why you want to do all your design.
Yeah,
That's why I have to keep your scope small.
So, things as simple as adding a little bit of a white texture and, some snow graphic to a pixel art can take quite a bit of time. Ask Bruno how long pixel art can take you. So these are both. Yeah.
Actually, I just thought about this because what we were talking about before. So instead of sending them 6 files, right? Is it a possibility to actually send them 1 file, but in like Illustrator have multiple layers and each layer be its own individual
I
asset?
wouldn't if I were you, because then even assuming you have a developer who even knows what Illustrator is, it's still going to take them more time to basically just take off those layers and paste them onto a new artboard. That's what they're going to end up doing.
I think as much work as you can get done ahead of time so that you can just, see, I have the, issue sometimes running with developers that I will mock something up and it's this size, right? I assume that by handing it to somebody like Jared, he's going to say, oh, you gave me this huge image, but you actually want it this way, right? Chances are that Jared's just going to take the image in the size I gave it to him and just put it there, right? Because it's not Jared's job necessarily to size things up and make them specific, or take the Illustrator file and export every single button and every single element of it, right? So the more I can do ahead of time for Jared, it's going to save time for myself. For Jared coming back to me and saying, like, man, you didn't even, slice this file. Can you please just like process yourself? And it's going to save time for Jared because then he says, I need the play button or the shuffle button. It's already an asset that's created in a folder. It's already sized to the dimensions that it has to be, the correct resolution, the correct color. Jared just has to take that. It's not as simple as taking it and dropping it in, but he makes it look like it's magic. So essentially, I'm trying to say it's like the more work you do ahead of time and the more planning you do at the design stage, the more you're gonna know all the things you're gonna be needing and what sizes are gonna, be convenient for somebody to put them in action.
And the clearer design you have, the more concrete of an idea you have, as well as communicating with your artist as well as your developer what you want to have seen, it's gonna reduce the time it takes to develop something.
Quick question on that, just the whole design, or focusing on design before development. A cool thing that I experienced myself was with Ritual as an app when they first started. They were just going around to restaurants with pretty much 6 screens. Like there's a high level overview of how it's going to work. And it was just a design, it didn't do anything, you couldn't press anything, it was just pictures of what they had in mind. And at the time it looked more like a Domino's ordering app. They didn't have all the things that they had, obviously they have today. Something like that, do you guys help with, like specifically just mock-ups, like say 6 screens of this is how it's gonna work? And, or do you know resources that can help with that?
Yeah, we can do that now. Yeah, so that was like that, what we had earlier was, every screen laid out. But that is usually how it goes. We'll get every screen laid out. If there is a target demographic, usually we'll go to specific target demographic. I've done this before for previous research projects where you take a what is like a wireframe, and then see what the demographic says. In this case, it was restaurant owners. Often students will be the target of a lot of stuff. So, I'm sure you've done a survey where does this look wonky, right? So, yeah. But again, that's part of your design. Again, to determine target demographic. That would be a core concept. Like, we want this to target women 16 to 35, the GTA area. They make $20,000 to $60,000, and they commute using the King streetcar. Well, now that you'll come to us. Hopefully, you've done that, and that's part of your design. And you'll come to us, and we'll say, you know what? I want this app to be fairly intuitive. It's going to be about 6 screens total, and we'll say, Bruno, come on in. We're going to game this thing out. This will probably be about 2 to 3 meetings in which there's going to be a lot of drawing, there's going to be a lot of whiteboard, and a lot of I don't think that works. And then we'll have, maybe it'll be cardstock if you pay for it. We'll go with the nice paper with the 6 screens, or SurveyMonkey is usually pretty good for doing, you show people what it's going to be and then you ask very specific questions. Of course, this is getting into market research. So the other resource would be, you might want to take our wireframe and go to a market research firm, and they'll give you, the full demographic breakdown of what they thought. These auditing firms are really great, but again, that's quite a bit of cost. Just to do a supply demand on a store is about $10,000. That was 10 years ago. We actually have a question from the audience.
But I was just saying, because we're at the stage basically, it's just we wanted to find out the differentiators of which company to actually choose for UI design or something like that. There's so many people out there that actually offer this, and it's like, hey, they charge hourly or per job or how many weeks, but something specifically like that to do a wireframe, like what would that cost?
Just the wireframe?
Yeah, like for let's say 6. It does not have the functionality to do what we want it to do, but just so we could show the kind of steps to get there.
Pitch it to somebody.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's
Because our plan is to do a raise after things like that, right? We want to get market research, to do a raise and get into incubator, accelerator type thing.
For sure.
So a lot of it comes down to low-cost prototyping. So there's free tools that are available, for example, for iPad and Windows and Mac. One of the examples for it is Adobe XD, which you're able to basically plug in all the functionality in terms of UI that your app is going to have. So it's kind of like what. Sorry, what's your name? Say. You were explaining, right? Like they take the app to the end user and they have it tested out. Now it might not have connectivity; it might be just in a offline mode or something of sorts, and they'll does this make sense to you? Like, does this confuse you, or are you able to get to the ordering part or your business registering part in that app, right? And again, it doesn't mean that by pressing submit, this is going to go into the cloud. Like maybe it's just a mock-up, right? But essentially, that's the kind of exercises that we would do so that we know that it's not just what we believe it's going to work, but we actually go to the people that we're looking to use the app in the end and see if they understand the user interface, if they're able to succeed by using it, right? Now, to give you an estimate of time as to how long this would take or what the cost involved would be, I think that's a long conversation. I mean, I guess that's the short answer, right? That it's going to be something we'd have to sit down, maybe even take some pen to paper and do some rough mock-ups of, okay, where exactly are you at with this? What research have you conducted? And what kind of let's say, financial backing you have, or what kind of team do you have to work with to be able to develop something like that, right? So I mean, I don't know at what stage you are of developing something, but yeah, to give you a rough estimate of hours, I mean, it's at least a 2-hour meeting to begin with, right?
Yeah.
Plus, I'd say roughly 20 to 30 hours of mocking up an app, just basic functionality into Adobe Illustrator or Adobe XD, and then basically taking it from there, right?
Also, I used Sketch one time and Sketch actually walks you through how to use Sketch. It's like a Sketch university, basically showing you how to use the platform. And if you want to save some money, you could just kind of do it yourself and learn how to use Sketch and kind of build your wireframe screen by screen using Sketch. And then I implemented that into InVision, so I can show my users how each screen would work. And if you guys don't know about InVision, then InVision's like a prototyping tool where you can now create the mock-up with Sketch screen by screen, and then use InVision to walk users through how to use your app, website, stuff like that.
So some of these platforms even offer the possibility of giving direct feedback on the specific page, even the specific button that they're going to press, right? So that's one more tool to gather information from your end user or people that are testing it out, essentially.
Like if you're looking at the incubator, Mars helps wireframing specifically. They have like a tech incubator. And the only reason Mars comes to mind is because I know they don't ask for equity. So if you're interested in wireframing, you're still in this very infancy part of your app or your business, maybe take a look at Mars. Street here.
Or talk to us.
I think we want to move it on to distribution, but I'll just leave us with one really quick point on the note of contractors and artwork. If you're a startup, be prepared for your friends and family to come and say, oh, I can do this. Do you need somebody to do this? I'm great at that. Be cognizant of what you can expect when you're accepting help from friends and families. If they have a full-time job, they can't be expected to do the same size and scope of work as a contractor that you're paying to focus on that task. Basically, I'm not saying don't do it ever, but be careful about what tasks you make available to that, because they might not be exactly what you wanted, and they're probably not going to be finished at the time that you want it. Also, do yourselves a favor. Don't be like me. Even if your friends and family are offering to do something for free, put it on paper. Both of you sign, even if it's just a sign that they're doing it for free, for credit. You don't want to be me and chasing people down 6 months later to sign a contract after the fact about something they've already done. You don't want to be like me and be chasing people down for 6 months and then have somebody come back to you saying, if you had told me I was going to sign something, I never would have done it for you. Then you're just I'm the green. So just protect yourself, protect them, put something on paper, no matter what the cost of the job is, even if it's free. Beta testing, distribution.
So between development and distribution, what really ties them together is testing. There are 3 technical phases of testing: internal, alpha, and beta. The internal test is what the developer is usually doing throughout the entire process. Jared will usually come to me and say, hey, does this work? And I'll boot it up on my computer and I'll tell him no, and then he'll say, what did the bug report say? Then the next phase is usually where you're comfortable giving it, maybe since you're a startup, unless you are participating in a larger institution that can do specific testing and can alpha and beta in your specific target demographic. You're most likely going to friends and family. So choose your best friends, and by your best friends in this case, I really do mean the friends that are going to give you critical feedback that's genuine and not just telling you the button didn't work, I hate it. That's not what you want. No, when you're testing both an alpha, beta, and internal for Apple, you have to use something called TestFlight. Who here has used TestFlight? Cool. All right. So TestFlight is the app store for apps that are in beta or alpha. So Google, you can just send a code and then they can download it normally from the store. With Apple, you're going to have to go through these QA processes, these quality assurance processes. For internal testing or alpha testing, where members of your team, you usually don't have to go through any hurdles. The biggest hurdle being in-app purchases, or the moment your app makes money. But between external testing, which is when you're finally giving it out to people who are not part of your team, they're receiving like a code to download your app. That's when Apple will test your app. Someone at Apple is actually taking your app and testing it, and then they're posting it, or they're allowing the post to go through. So often you will receive feedback from both Apple and then from your testers. Now, testing is important. Well, when you're testing, please be rigorous, especially if you're working with us. Don't just tell us the button doesn't work. There are parts to testing that are very important, especially one thing we call, which is repeatability. If you can't make the bug happen again, we probably aren't going to be able to find it. So that means that if this button didn't work, I don't know, turn off the app, try it again. Did the button still not work? That's when you take a screenshot, you send us a lot of information, which was like time of when it happened, what phone, what model you're on, what operating system, what button specifically. Did you hit the whole button or did you just miss it? That's important. I'm sure everybody's been upset when like a button didn't work on an app and then they're pressing it. That's because testing wasn't done properly, or there was lackluster testing. Now, in terms of testing, you can't find everything. You could do quality assurance until the cows come home. It's something that you're always going to be doing. So when you're doing testing on your app, just get it to a place where it'll pass Apple's QA. That's good enough. And then bugs found after the fact, that's you can go back to your developer and really evaluate whether or not that's something you want fixed, or it's just going to be there and you're going to live with it. Feedback on UI and UX is a little different, mainly because if someone's complaining about the look of something, maybe that's something that they're complaining about, but you want to keep. For example, your button that might be different, a shuffle button that isn't the standard shuffle icon. Now, be aware that UI really is art, and if someone isn't interpreting it properly, unlike art, where say the artist is just telling you, well, you didn't get it, too bad, right? You want your user to get it. So it really is doing art in reverse and making sure that the people who, especially your target demographic, understand it. Finally, ensure compliance. The onus is on you to ensure compliance in your distribution areas. Apple's not going to do it for you. They don't care if you get fined. The last stage after you pass QA is you get to post, and then you get to support your app. That's always fun for us, because now that you've paid for something, you still have to pay us to make sure it keeps working. Can you imagine? You buy this table, and you still got to pay the carpenter to make sure it's still a table tomorrow? That's crazy. The light fell off. Oh, no. You got to bring that specific carpenter in here to fix that specific light. So that's something you're going to want to consider. Supporting your app. Apple does demand that you be able to support your app a certain amount of time, depending on the life cycle of your app. If your app's only going to be on the store for a month, while, I don't know, let's say your Coors, you want an app, it's going to be available during the Coors summer or spring party, whatever, right? If it's only going to be on the store for like 2 weeks, don't worry too much about supporting it. If you're on the store for maybe a year, 2 years, where people are reviewing your app, they're giving feedback, Apple does demand that feedback goes not unresponded to, but a developer has to be there to at least say something or implement a change. So this is our games store page. So this is the Google store page, which is not very different from the Apple store page. But these are what we have on our store page is the minimum that your app store page is going to have. So does anybody have any questions about this before I get into it?
You have to pay to open the
No. Oh, yes. We had to pay, no, not for the store page. We had to pay to post anything. $25 upfront for Google. It's $100 a year for Apple. And if you don't pay your $100 a year, they will take down your app. That's your developer's license. Questions? I want to get into it. So if you notice, we have the app name at the top, and then we have the thumbnail. That's different from our logo. That's the app's logo. So when you're getting your logos, you got to make sure, do you want your logo to be the same as the app's logo? Some businesses it is. I think Capital One has the same logo everywhere. That's something you might want to be cognizant of. Do you want your app's logo to look similar to your own company's logo? That's something, that's part of your design. Then you have the title of the app, and then you have the publisher, which is us, JACL, and then you have your genres. You can put anything there. Anything. Okay? Whatever you think mildly relates to your app, put there. Because those are your search terms. That's what people, when they search on the store, this is when your app is going to show up. So we have puzzle and pretend play. Pretend play because we are rated E for everyone, and our app is part of the children's store program app at Google Play, with the Google Play Store. So that's something you have to be very important. When I put simulation, it got changed to pretend play because it's on the kids store. And then under that, we have our app's rating. Now, if your app is going to be part of a specific association, for example, or it's going to be rated by a specific association, you have to be prepared to pass that association's requirements. So we're E for everyone, and we're ages 6 to 12. And then it says that we offer in-app purchases. And next to install, we don't have a price. That's where your price would go. And then you have to have 6 screenshots of your app. We have 6, it's only showing 1. You have to put something in the description part. You can't get away with not putting something in the description part. And then every time you post a new version, so an update, it's going to ask you what's new. Ours, the latest one, was still official release, so that's what I put there. It'll show you the last time we updated it, which was November 16, 2018. Our size, which is 70 megabytes. Well, apparently with 10 and more people have installed. It requires Android 4.1 and up. That's the American regulation where a certain amount of devices have to be able to use it. And so we can get into the technical API and all that stuff, but I'm not going to. Just know that if you make an app that's too complex, it may not pass because older phones may not be able to use it. So our content rating is E. The in-app purchases go from $1 to 100. I do not let you see the permissions of this app, but since this app does not store any of your own personal information, I don't need to. And finally, it says who developed the game. So these are all things that you're gonna have to have a privacy policy. Those can be generated automatically by just putting in what you're doing on certain websites. But this is all the tedious work that I believe you would rather do, rather than paying me $120 an hour to do it for you. So think about it. If this took me about 2 hours to do, and you come to us and you say, "Hey, make the App Store page," I'm going to tell you that's $240. Are you sure you want to pay that?
Question.
Yes.
So under the description, right? If you put in like keywords in the description, would that help you like rank on Google?
Keywords?
Yeah, keywords
No.
in the description.
No. Your keywords, especially on the Google Play Store, are going to be your genres.
Okay.
Those are your search terms. Okay. Now we're going to workshop it. Who has an app ID? Okay, great.
Wow.
Yeah.
We have to pick.
Oh yeah, now we got to choose. We're going to go with, I'm sorry, I never got your name.
Chris.
Chris, we're going to go with your app. So there are 3 phases, as you recall. There were design, development, and distribution. Now that you've presumably taken in all the information I've given you, you've learned it perfectly, we're going to go through, maybe you might not come out of this with a wireframe. You're not going to come out of this with code, and it's definitely not going to be distributed, but we can at least game through your app. So let's start with design. What's a core concept?
Core concept would be a recruiting platform, so
Okay.
profiles.
So it's a recruiting platform.
Yeah.
So who here has used a recruiting platform before? Okay. What in your experience, what did a recruiting platform have that, it couldn't do without? Like, did you use several? They all,
So I've used quite a few, like mainly Indeed or LinkedIn. So to start with, I think the main thing that you need to provide is what I do. Like if I want to find a job, the first thing is I have to give my information
okay,
to the.
so we're collecting information from the user. That's a core concept. It's a core part of the app. You're gonna need to collect user data. You're gonna need to store that user data. What else? Did all of them link to calendars, or did they just link to your Google Calendar?
I don't think both of them link to a calendar.
So calendar integration isn't necessary. Does anybody else use these? So I mean, apparently LinkedIn is a what is this? A recruiting app. Who here has used LinkedIn? Okay, so what didn't you like about LinkedIn?
I can search jobs based on specific keywords.
Okay.
And then I can see companies' reviews and see other how it works there.
Okay, so you're making notes for now because I see the rest of the line. Okay, fine. I'll just keep track of them. And you need to be able to search companies. So companies are gonna have to have their own profile. So users and companies have profiles. So now you're collecting data from several different kinds of users.
Okay, I have a question for you. What sets your app apart from all the other recruiting apps like Indeed or LinkedIn or that other one that you mentioned or that you mentioned?
So natural insights. So my value to mainly right now is the temporary work industry is I provide ratings and verification of your history. So like in the temporary industry, you would hire based on availability. So what I would do is basically like Upwork, when you have a rating scale on Upwork. However, I would have a continuous rating scale on current jobs and future jobs. So like if I hired somebody for like, let's say stagehands, or let's say I hired a event staff for a trade show that just happened called the Home Show. And I said that their performance was excellent. They showed up on time, they were great. However, there was another staff that didn't show up on time and wasn't great. So that staff wouldn't really be able to differentiate itself from the other staff because there is no platform that provides a rating scale of his experience, as well as everything on a resume can be a lie. So I will verify with reputability.
So you're rating the employee, not the employer.
So with Glassdoor rates the employer. However, I'm not really sure how. Actually, there is really no verification on whether or not that employee that has rated Glassdoor is actually a current employee or a past employee. Kind of just say, yeah, I was a past employee or I was a current employee, and that stays anonymous. But I will be verifying whether or not that person on the employee side has actually worked there before, and then the person on the work. So basically, the worker and the employer will be rated. So Glassdoor only rates the employer. I'll be rating the employer and the worker.
Sort of like Uber does, right?
The driver and
the-
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So you're like the Uber of temp help.
For temp right now, but you can apply this in technically every industry because banking. I worked at Scotiabank one time and they did a verification on my employment history. So they use a third party called First Advance, and they basically called all my employers and said, hey, did this guy work there? And I submitted like my employment history to them separately from my resume, and they just called and said, hey, did this guy work there? So that's like a form of verification of the employment history. And then I would include the performance rating on it as well.
Have you thought about, is that your system for verifying the employment history, or are you going to have staff that cold call to find out if people actually worked and developed these places? Is that the idea? Or was there another verification system that is in play?
So right now there's two high up people that do employment verification. So like once I gain a lot of subscribers on my website, one of my strategies is I may partner up with them to just kind of have them do the verification because they're already experts in their
Okay,
field.
okay, so there are
Like
kind
Sterling
of
fact check?
agencies
Sterling, exactly.
that already
Like
do this.
Yeah, so
You
there's,
have to do that service for you.
they
Okay.
do that service already, however, they do not necessarily provide the rating scale. They just call employers and say, hey, this has.
Yes or no?
Yeah, yes or no, basically. So,
The other
That's
thing-
still good though, and probably better than setting up to hire your own staff to do this, especially as a startup.
yeah, exactly. That's what I'm considering, but I need to gain some kind of traction for me to actually go to the VP and say, hey, I want to partner with you. So, yeah, that's my goal.
Oh, okay, so I missed a little bit about that. Would you use the information that they collect to rate people, incorporate that?
So that, like, the whole process of rating, that's kind of like how I would kind of work that out with my team. So they could potentially do the background checks and collect the data from based on their rating and like what I'm gonna be rating them on. However, I can have my staff do that from the information that they give me, whether it's the past employer's name and stuff like that.
Okay, so you'd have staff kind of go out, do the background check, and then input that into the system?
No, so what we just said is there's two like people that are like two main companies that are known for doing background checks. So one of them is Sterling Employment. So they do background checks already.
Right.
So one of my strategies would be instead of hiring my own staff to do the background checks for me, then I would partner up with Sterling and Sterling would do the background checks for me. And then I would collect that data and then put it onto my app.
Okay, alright.
I'm not trying to give you a problem that you might not have, but for example, in Toronto, a lot of people are international, right? So you might have a lot of people that have international work experience. So maybe you should think of how to rate that as well.
Yeah, and that's something that I would incorporate as well and strategize with my team how we go about doing employment verification on international students or international workers and stuff like that.
See, already, we're doing basic design, already it's getting bigger than you may have initially thought.
So this is where I caution you, well, that's an important feature, is that the minimum viable product? Would you include that as part of the minimum viable product?
Technically, yeah, because there's a lot of like immigrants that haven't have no work
Okay,
experience.
so you're gonna include it.
Okay.
Would you include it?
No.
No, but you brought up the problem.
I brought up the problem because I work with international students that are not able to work in Canada.
Okay,
But and since he was saying I would verify both the employer and the employee, then I thought you
Yeah.
might need to know about
you're
this.
calling job references abroad,
Yeah.
right? Maybe that's something that goes beyond your current scope. So, one thing we didn't establish for your app early on is why you gotta have all these little ducks in a row. Who's your target demographic? You know, that can be a great way to establish your app as, being different. That can be part of its value proposition. My app is gonna be, all these other apps are made by these little nerds in Silicon Valley. My app is gonna be made for the women of Toronto.
I saw an ad the other day for the Indigenous Women Hotline that just came out, and it's run by Indigenous women and speak all the languages. So that's what makes theirs different. We have 1,000 help hotlines. This one's specifically geared towards X by X. So just demographic.
So maybe that's something you wanna look into, maybe your value proposition. could
Maybe
be-
yours is really niche as a recruiting agency or recruiting.
Or a recruiting app.
Platform.
And then after you've, started to add in, after you've launched successfully in one target demographic, then you can start thinking of expanding. Because again, just like contractor work on your house, you can always do a little more later. So, that's it's dangerous to go down this road, but always, keep it in the back of your mind, you can patch it in. It's very possible to patch it.
Well, my target demographic would be like post-secondary students, just because they're they don't find they would be able to find those flexible work opportunities around their schedule, and then get rated based on their performance, and then they can now use that as leverage for their careers.
Right, so that's great. So you're kind of like, I'm building my resume on your app, and then I take my rating from your app, and I go to an employer after I've gotten my degree, and I say, look how great I work.
I think there's two things that come to mind listening to what you have to say about this. One is that in the case of people who have no work history, it might actually be easier to just accept those on your app or web app anyway and just have them have no ratings than it would be to filter them out. That might be an idea you want to consider, and maybe have something that's like, hire this person with no history for a week, leave a review, and we'll give you a bonus. And that at the same time helps you build people's work history and helps you get people onto your platform. And it incentivizes for employers that they actually hire people with, a scant history or maybe even low ratings. And that way your app doesn't die because employers only want to hire the same 10,000 people, let's say.
Yeah, that's something also that apps like LinkedIn and other platforms encourage you to do, right? So that your likability to work is by you completing your profile more thoroughly, right?
Yeah.
So the more information you give them, essentially, is the more information that the potential employer is going to be able to have to make a decision ultimately on whether or not you have a certain score in your specific app. But I can totally see the use of that, right? Like if you have a certain grade, then it might mean that you do a certain quality of work. Whereas if you have a bad grade or no grade whatsoever, you're going to be in the lower tier of the applicants that are in the platform, essentially.
Another thing that comes to mind, the second thing, is consider working into the data that you're going to gather, verifying people's citizenship or verifying people's work visas. Because, oh boy, is that something that these recruitment agencies spend a hell of a lot of time doing. And that is something, if somebody hires a temp through you, they aren't a citizen, or they're an illegal immigrant, or they don't have a visa, then they look really bad.
But I don't know,
Then they're going to be really mad
maybe
at
that's
you.
his value proposition,
I mean,
I
maybe,
hired the illegals from my.
maybe you can put a
maybe
disclaimer
that-
in your terms of use that's like, we do not guarantee citizenship or visa.
Yeah.
But even then, consider that you might need that if that's the route you're going to go. Maybe do research into whether that's even a thing you're allowed to do, because I know employment, especially here in Ontario and Canada in general, they're pretty strict around
Well, you can't
what
get
you
on
can
that.
and can't do.
So yeah, maybe that's what you need, a lawyer on your team, but what's a labor lawyer, or maybe even a whole labor firm. But again, so you can see how these design meetings very quickly get out of hand, which is why it's very good to go to a developer having thought of. But again, it's hard to think of this on your own. That's almost why we're workshopping here. So does anybody have another app idea? Maybe we can help game out a little too. Maybe let's talk about app feel with your app.
Okay, so mine is a music streaming app.
Yeah.
Like I told you guys previously, I'm intending on for iOS and Android devices.
Great.
More will come when it comes from it. But yeah, basically it's a music streaming app. The core concept, which I'll say my value proposition. I can't really give out too much about the app because it's still development.
Sure.
However, what I would rather do is tell you the problem that I solve. So one of the problems is more than one problem, but one of the main problems I solve is for the actual underground artists.
Okay.
So right now, if you look at the industry, out of 100%, there's about 20% of the artists are signed to major labels. And in my eyes, and in most people's eyes, those artists are well taken care of, right? They got deals, they got whatever, right? The other 80% are the underground artists. Now, underground artists, based off market research that I've done myself, so primary market research, I found out that their biggest problem is actually getting new customers. Because when they first enter the market, let's say, for example, like my friend's going to be a rapper, right? They would go become a rapper, then they would try to get as many followers, fans, whatever, as they can, right? So first they'll exhaust their internal, networks, so like their family, their friends, or whatever. Then they will move on. Well, they'll get a little bit of extra people from those networks as well. But then they'll move on to like social media and try to get a bunch of other random people to follow them or like them. And hopefully what they'll do is convert into ticket sales, because that's the number one way of making money, right? So what my app will do is actually get them customers. So I solved that problem getting customers because I incentivize customers to actually go to them.
Okay, so great, so you've got your core concept. Now, is your app gonna look like Spotify?
Well, I can show you a
Apple
picture.
Music? Is your app gonna look like?
But essentially, there are some factors that's going to be the same. Like for example, play button to play button, like
Yeah.
album cover to album cover, right?
Yeah.
I would say one thing that I do that they do not do is I'm actually sticking to like a single face design. So you know how, for example, you go to a website, you click on like a tab on the top, and it'll go to another page. Mine doesn't do that. Mine always has like a, or maybe it does that in the background, but it doesn't display that way to the user.
So one of the questions that I have is in terms of value proposition, seeing that the market is flooded with music apps and music promotion platforms like SoundCloud and more independent players. What is the spin that you're putting on your app in order to make it more appealing to?
Well, I mean, to start, none of them actually gets customers for any of the music, for any of the artists. So I mean, that to start, we can start with that.
So
I sign up
also-
I'm gonna do that.
And you're gonna like guarantee customers almost?
I don't say I don't have to guarantee it.
So, cause it sounds like
what I would
the streaming portion of your app, how does that help the musician? It seems like you almost want to create a membership platform where like the musician will join and then you'll hustle for them.
I guess. More so what I was intending on doing is basically building a platform where I incentivize users to listen to music. So think of it as like a reward system for listening to music that you would listen to either way.
Oh, so I like, as someone, as a non-musician, let's say I'm just I'm a potential fan. I'm gonna gain points on your app for
You
having
gain points for listening to
listened.
music. So let's say, for example,
And then those points, what are they're gonna translate into like cheaper tickets for me to go to these guys
it could
like
be
the first
just
time
it could
round?
be merchandise, it could be whatever, right?
Okay.
But really and truly what I would do is if you listen to, let's say, rock music or hip hop or whatever, you would listen to, let's say, if you listen to hip hop, you listen to Drake right now, right? You listen to Drake music, you will receive points. On those points, you can then use that to show tickets for merchandise for Drake or whatever. However, what I do by bringing more customers, like Drake's a bad example because he's big, I'm more so for the underground artists.
Yeah.
But those underground artists, what would happen is, say, for example, you're on my platform for points because you want to go to a Drake concert. You're on my platform looking at songs that have a higher point value than other songs, right? So if you're an underground artist now, and I associate more points to your
So
song,
yeah, so
if
my
someone's sick
song as an underground artist is gonna be more valuable to be listened to than
Than Drake's
Drake's song. Because he's not an underground artist.
yes. And that might entice
So
you,
that's-
even if you're going for the points, to listen to the song, it might convert to.
So that's almost like a
actually
game. This is the
That's
gamification of music streaming.
And there's
So-
more, like finding actual artists, because I found another problem of actually, let's say like I live in Toronto, so if I want to find underground artists in Toronto, what I really have, the only methods I have is like either seeing what's already popping online, or maybe friends in the trade or whatever.
Yeah.
But an average person either, well, they have access to online obviously, right? But not access to people that's in the trade. So my platform make it easier to find because there's a lot of filtering options that could narrow down
So
individual songs. and
You're
narrow down
offering
individual songs.
exposure and worth.
And I'm paying the money because they're bringing the money for streaming the music.
Now, as a non-musician user, am I paying a subscribe? I'm paying
Yeah,
a
you're paying a
subscription.
subscription, which is going to be, it's already planned to have it competitively priced with Apple Music and Spotify.
Yeah.
Except they do $9.99. They do the 99 as like a little marketing tactic. I say screw that. I'm just going to try and jump onto that.
Okay, I sort of see the way that your platform works. And again, I just come from the idea that there's a flooding market right now of apps that need to do something similar. Is the idea that maybe the spin that your app would have over top of them would be that it is localized, right? And that maybe it offers the possibility for bookers that work at certain venues to be able to go in and find independent talent that they can then bring into the venue and perform live. And then if you have a certain number of points for listening to certain types of songs, then you might get kickbacks when you go to see them perform, right? Like you might get.
Well, yeah, that's a good idea. I was actually going to have what I call artist showcase myself, so shows that I'll put on monthly with someone else that I'm partnering with. So that's obviously an idea that someone else can do as well. However, my key points, like if they want to use my app for that, they can, and other people can. I'm more so interested in, like I said, getting customers for artists, because that's the biggest problem. You know, if they're stuck with their 100 people that they have to pay a ton of money to acquire more customers. So I'd rather stick with getting them customers. And then if other people want to do that, they can. I will also do some of that myself. But I think the bigger problem is helping them get more customers. So at least that way you can enter their sales funnel. And then if they can make it convert, they can make it convert.
Yeah, great. Okay, so we're,
I'll ask one last comment.
alright,
I would say, so obviously there's three aspects here that I'm picking up on. One is you have the booking aspect, and that's a question you can't really speak to. You have the supply chain aspect in terms of this merchandise and storing it and getting it to people. That
I
we
don't
can't
do none of
speak
that.
to. Okay, so that's all like outsourced.
Yes.
So the one thing that I'm really interested in and that I would recommend you look into is gamification, because the rewards program you're describing is basically gamification. Like Tinder is gamification. You could say that Snapchat is gamification. And like people really like gamification right now. I think that is something that's really integral to your idea. I think that's probably your core concept number one. Just in my opinion.
okay, so we're coming up on 8 p.m. That is the technical deadline for this workshop. We're available to stick around, but I'm not gonna force people into some kind of, thinking, oh, this guy's still talking, I gotta still sit here. So a number of our colleagues have left. Please feel free to do so. We're officially done and now. But I'm willing to stick around if you are. Are you? Okay,
Whoever wants to stick around, stick around. We'll be like cleaning up anyway, so
yeah.
we won't miss you. And whoever wants to go, thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, I hope you learned stuff, but
this was useful
gather
for you.
around the table while we do a little bit of cracking up and ask questions. I know Jared's great at answering them.
Anyone have any technical questions? Answer those.
Also, this was live streamed, and the video will be available, I guess, the moment I press done. So, it'll be on the Start GBC YouTube page, which you can ask Sophia for.
So, have you guys ever heard of Start GBC? Yes. So Start GBC is Georgetown College's entrepreneur support service. So we provide workshops like this and resources to help entrepreneurs or people who are interested in entrepreneur